Hello everyone, and dear Miss Haswin, we are Group Sparkling, and I am the leader Zihan. And on the top of the screen, you can see our team members. They are Beiji, Kaixuan, Cindy, Angelin, and Clarissa, Jocelyn. So our topic today is the understanding of globalization and glocalization. We have divided it into 6 parts. First of all, I and Kaixuan will give a brief introduction of the two terms, and then Beiji will bring you to explore the relationship between the two. After that, Cindy and Jocelyn will take you to feel the impact of the globalization and glocalization. And you will find that, wow, globalization and glocalization are around us. And every globalization also brings some problems. So at the very end of our presentation, we will also give some suggestions of how to face the challenges. Okay, now let's back to our topic, and I will introduce to you what is globalization. As American sociologist Richard Schaeffer said, it is a term to describe how things are incorporated worldwide. However, globalization only has a short history, as it first appeared in the Oxford Concise Dictionary of Sociology in 1994. Globalization won't be achieved within one day, but it is a long-term process. So just like Ren Weidong said in his research, it attracts a lot of scholars to research on it. He said there is a dominant ideology that the revolutions of science and technology plays an essential role in promoting globalization. And all the 3 revolutions actually made great achievements on means of production, transportation, and also the community tours. However, according to Jeffrey Sachs, he is a world-known economist. He said globalization began about 7,000 years ago. Sachs divided the globalization into 7 ages, and now we're in the digital age. And the world interconnected everywhere, and so do the global economy. There is a subprime mortgage crisis in the United States in 2008. Or we can say that globalization has brought convenience to people's lives and also stimulates economy and social development. However, problems has also arisen, like the global ecological crisis and the increasing gap between developed and developing countries. Okay, then move to Kaixuan for more information about glocalization.
This is Kaixuan, and I will introduce the part 2, Glocalization. Glocalization is formed by global and local. The term was coined in Harvard Business Review in 1980 by sociologist Rohan Robinson. It means the creation of products or services intended for global market, but customized to suit the local cultures. Glocalization means that when companies are engaged in global economic exchange, they need to formulate different policies based on culture and social difference in different regions. Products that are successful in one region will be not successful in another region. Walmart and Carrefour do not adapt the Asian market because they have not achieved glocalization. Stores with large warehouse and large purchase of food did not meet the characteristic of Asians' exquisite shopping and focus on fresh food. Glocalization encouraged companies to satisfy different cultures in different nations. In principle, the products will be more cultural significance or emphasize the local feeling will be more glocalization. It will be more acceptable to consumers. In China, McDonald's redesigned the counters, chairs, and desks. It reflects the considerations of the height and body shape of the Chinese people. In order to open the Indian market, McDonald's added some dishes and other local specific to the menu. In Saudi Arabia, especially in some countries with religion, McDonald's development is particularly careful, and they try to avoid religious trouble, like never use pork in their foods.
Thanks for Kaixuan's presentation on Lin Beiji. Let's come to part 3, the relationship between globalization and glocalization. Conquer, building on Robinson's framework, argues that globalization or glocalization should be seen as an interdependent process. The problem of simultaneous globalization of the local and the localization of globality can be expressed as the twin processes of macro-localization and micro-globalization. It's true that globalization and glocalization are 2 processes of coexistence. However, globalization seems the further development of the globalization. Glocalization comprises two processes, globalization and localization. Glocalization is the way for globalization to landing locally, and globalization is the result of globalization. It's not like globalization is a single arrow from local to global. Glocalization is a two-way interaction between local and global. The interviewing of globalization and localization in the process of globalization, especially the complex effect of local reaction on globalization, is the difference. The upward and downward effects of the globalization reflect the interaction between the whole and the local. It is explained that the local extends to the whole world, and then the local-fied university can be combined with its particularity and reborn in a new way in the local place. This is the process of local interaction into the global, which in turn promotes globalization. Their relationship is not just an interdependent process, and globalization is also the progressive of globalization. Now let's come to part 4.
Thank you, Beiji, for explaining part 3. I am Cindy Angelin, and I will explain the part 4, which is the impacts that globalization and glocalization brings to the world. Of course, globalization and glocalization brings a lot of impacts to the world in different areas, such as business, the environmental that we live in, and also to us as humans. First, I will explain about the impacts that globalization brings. Of course, globalization brings both positive and negative impacts to the world. But first, let me explain about the positive impacts that globalization brings to the world. The first is communication became much more easier with the presence of the internet, so that we can communicate with our friends and family even if we are far away, by using Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, WeChat, Line, WhatsApp, and so much more. Secondly, abstaining from information and education became more accessible to every person in this world. Thirdly, with the invention of vehicle, traveling become much more easily, and we can spot a higher mobility. Fourth, the tolerance between humans increases significantly as people learn how to become open-minded and become tolerative of other people. And the last, the fulfillment of increasingly complex and unlimited needs of humans will gradually begin to be fulfilled periodically. As there are positive impacts, globalization also brings negative impacts to the world. For example, people will become more consumptive as their needs are easily fulfilled now. Secondly, there's no filtration information of whether it is good or bad. And thirdly, people are leaning more toward Western culture and living their own culture and heritage, because they deem that everything that Western culture have is more cooler than their own culture and heritage. Lastly, individualistic and self-deprecating attitudes often occurs to individuals who follow the flow of globalization continuously, and that is not good. As for globalization, it is believed that it brings some impacts to the world as well. For example, people will find it much more easier to accept different culture if it's adapted to the local taste, so that they can also follow the flow of globalization. But there is also a negative side of globalization. For example, local businesses is declining, and it's causing a lot of labor loss because of how people like the global international brands more, like Starbucks, McDonald's, Uniqlo, H&M, and so much more, instead of local brand. That is all from me. My teammate Jocelyn, Clarissa will explain more in details. Thank you.
Thank you, Cindy, for that wonderful explanation about the impact. Now, I, Clarissa Jocelyn, will be continuing on what my teammate Cindy has just explained. Since globalization is mostly noticeable in the business industry, let's talk about that first, shall we? Although globalization sounds like a positive thing to happen, it is actually harming the environment. How, you ask? Here, let me explain. So, with companies trying to meet the demands of their customers, they might resort to tactics where it will damage the environment. such as deforestation to create more land, or gas pollution or river pollution due to the harmful factory waste, like let's say factories who produce plastic or who produce toys or have something to do with oil and whatnot. However, even though this sounds like a negative thing, but it's really like a double-edged sword, where this sort of impact might also spark an initiative in people to help combat these wasteful products. If you notice, now a lot of people are resorting to using bamboo straws or metal straws so that they won't need to use plastic straws. An example is Starbucks. They're already using paper straws to combat that plastic waste. And now supermarkets are beginning to encourage their customers to use reusable bags so that they don't have to produce plastic bags for their customers anymore, thus reducing the waste. This motivates them to create an eco-friendly product that will not produce any harmful waste to the environment. Now let's move on to another context, which is social context. In society, especially in the younger generation like myself, globalization is more noticeable in the entertainment industry. For example, if I gave you this word BTS, of course you know that, oh yeah, that is the Korean pop group that is now booming amongst the younger generation. Or if I say Marvel or Marvel Cinematic Universe, you'd be, oh yeah, that's the movie series where there's Iron Man, Captain America, Thor, Hulk, and whatnot. And what if I mention, let's say, Totoro, or maybe Spirited Away, or Naruto, or One Piece? You'd know that, oh, that is an anime, which is a genre where usually animated series are produced from Japan. Now, because of that, the younger generation consumes entertainment that is produced from other countries. But like to them, they're like, oh, this is really interesting. Sure, it's from another country. Sure, it may be in a different language that I don't understand, but I see it as an enjoyable thing, and I would like to spend my time watching or consume these kinds of things. So globalization in a social context, it is much more noticeable in the younger generation, especially when it comes to hobbies and their entertainment. Now, for glocalization, however, it's not that different from globalization if you think about it. For example, since I live in Indonesia, we of course have McDonald's. But have you ever seen a McDonald's menu that has the option to buy rice? No. You've also never seen an option to buy a burger that says beef rendang burger, because that's exclusive to Indonesia only. Same goes to Japan Starbucks. They once put out a special menu which they produce 47 new flavors that is dedicated to 47 prefectures in Japan. Of course, you wouldn't see that menu in America now, would you? Because that's exclusive to Starbucks Japan's menu. So these companies are trying to cater their products to the local taste in order to gain more attention. So globalization really is just really for people to try and modify their products so that the locals will enjoy it. Now, glocalization can also be seen in the education system. How? So teachers will present a topic to their students or a global problem, and then they will ask the students to connect that topic or problem into a more local context or local problem. See if there's anything within their area that has a similar topic or problem as what the teacher had presented. By doing that, the teachers are helping students to understand the topic, because the topic or problem that the teacher had just presented is put into local context. If they put it into local context, students are able to understand it and relate to the matter even better, thus having a better understanding. Well, that's all from me discussing about the impacts of globalization and localization. So now I will pass on my mic to Kaixuan on explaining on how to deal with such changes in one's country. Thank you.
In the book Profit Over People, Nearly a Reason and Global Order, the writer Chomsky points that the glocalization and globalization brings many bad effects to developing countries. So what should we do when facing the globalization? For the economy, we as developing countries should participate actively in globalization, but at the same time protect ourselves from negative impacts. Actually, China did a good job in following the trend. In 1978, the government decided to conduct the reform and opening up policy. It enabled the rapid development of Chinese economy. However, as Cindy mentioned before, local business is declining because of the globalization and glocalization. Therefore, developing countries should develop their own industry and try to independently research and develop advantage technologies so that they won't reply the advantaged countries. For example, China's Huawei independently researched and developed 5G technology, gaining the leading advantage in the industry. Also, as Jocelyn said, we have serious environmental pollution now, so fomenting environment protection policy became quite important nowadays. For the labor laws from developing to developed areas, developing local industry and fomenting labor product policy are also useful solutions.
Thanks, Kaixuan, for the solutions. And with the globalization of economy, political globalization is unavoidable. The transnational cooperations developed. Also, the rise of the international organizations like the United Nations, and both of them promote the communication and development of the countries. However, they also surround national sovereignties. For example, Nike has developed some regulations for the subcontractors in developing countries. So states should participate actively in the international organizations and some activities. But meanwhile, they also need to have their own stand and set policies to protect their sovereignties. And culture communication across the countries is another characteristic of globalization. And Malaysia is a representative example. Malaysia is a multi-ethnic country. Globalization gives Malaysia societies more openness. And at the same time, because they are strong faith in their beliefs, they will not accept everything of other countries. And this is what developing countries should do when facing cultural communication or even cultural hegemony. On the one hand, we should respect other cultures and absorb the good ingredients to promote our own cultures. But remember, keep your own cultural identity instead of forgetting it. Okay, then move to Beiji.
Thanks Zihan and for health, globalization is pretty obvious during the pandemic. In front of the spread of virus, which is also the challenge of globalization, people's health is severely threatened. When people have doubts, hesitation, and aversion to globalization, and even come to the side of the opponents of globalization, and the voices of anti-globalization are rising. However, maybe global cooperation is an effective way to cope with global pandemic disease instead of anti-globalization. Firstly, to deal with the pandemic, actively cooperating with global organizations such as WTO is essential, and it is necessary to pay attention to global health system. Next, countries can learn from each other. For example, China may be a good example in controlling the spread in COVID-19, and other countries can localize it based on their own national institution. Finally, cooperation between countries and regions is also an effective way. The cooperation between China and Malaysia is a good example who joined hands to fight the pandemic. They shared medical resources during the COVID-19. In conclusion, we should adapt to globalization in a reasonable way and make good use of glocalization. This is all for our group's understanding of globalization and glocalization. Thank you for your watching.